I was determined that we would not give in, and we did not, for we were already at the cells. By his persistent public refusal to be humiliated, or to feel humiliated, Mandela rejected the distorted, self-debilitating relationship that the oppressor sought to impose upon him. Doing so enhanced his leadership among his fellow political prisoners and the respect he was accorded by the less sadistic guards and wardens of the prison. Now let's briefly consider the humiliator or oppressor. It's important to distinguish between two types. The humiliator who is deliberately seeking to humiliate as a way of demonstrating his or her power over the victim, and the humiliator who has no awareness that his or her actions are humiliating. The latter is only an advantaged member of an oppressive, humiliating system, which is seen as natural and normatively sanctioned. In such a system, the advantaged members and groups are unlikely to see their treatment of the disadvantaged or the advantage-disadvantage relationship as humiliating to the disadvantaged. Now, I turn to the dictionary definition of oppression. It's defined as the exercise of power in the burdensome, cruel, or unjust manner. Important in this definition, the oppressor exerts power over the oppressed in a harmful rather than beneficial way. In my writing, I make a distinction between injustice and oppression. Injustice can be a single event. As, for example, when a teacher gives you a poor grade because he dislikes your political view. Oppression is the experience of repeated, widespread, systemic injustice. It need not be extreme and involve a legal system, as in slavery, apartheid, or the lack of rights to vote, nor violent, as in tyrannical societies. The term civilized oppression has been used to characterize the everyday processes of oppression in normal life. Civilized oppression is embedded in unquestioned norms, habits, and symbols, and the assumptions underlying institutions and rules, and the collective consequences of following these rules. It refers to the vast and deep injustices some groups suffer as a consequence of often unconscious assumptions and reactions of well-meaning people in ordinary interactions, which are supported by the media and cultural stereotypes, as well as by the structural features of bureaucratic hierarchies and market mechanisms. We cannot eliminate I'm not going to go into detail on any of them, but let me just give you some summary statements. To sum up a section on distributive justice, let me say, every type of system, from a society to a family, distributes benefits, costs, and harms. One can examine the different forms in society of capital, for example. One can look at standard of living, wealth, the knowledge and skills and the social networks that enable people to do well in a society or that keep people down. And one can look at such benefits as income, education, health care, police protection, housing, water supplies, and such harms as accidents, rapes, physical attacks, imprisonment, death, and rat bites, and see how they are distributed among categories of people: rich versus poor, males versus females, employers versus employees, whites versus blacks, and so on. Such examination reveals gross disparities in distribution of one or another benefit or harm received by categories of people involved. Thus, blacks generally receive fewer benefits and more harm than whites in the United States. In most parts of the world, female children are less likely than male children to receive as much education or inherit parental property, and they are more likely to suffer from sexual abuse. Let me say about procedural injustice. In addition to assessing the fairness of the distribution of outcomes, individuals judge the fairness of the procedures that determine the outcome. Research evidence indicates that fair treatment and procedure are a more pervasive concern to most people than fair outcomes. Fair procedures are psychologically important because they encourage the assumption that they give rise to fair outcomes in the present and will also in the future. In some situations where it's not clear what fair outcomes should be, fair procedures are the best guarantee that the decision about outcomes is made fairly. Research indicates that one is less apt to feel committed to authorities, organizations, social policies, and governmental rules and regulations if the procedures associated with them are considered unfair. Also, people feel affirmed that the procedures to which they are subjected treat them with the respect and dignity they feel is their due. If so treated, it is easier for them to accept disappointing outcomes. Let me turn to moral exclusion. Moral exclusion refers to who is and who is not entitled to fair outcomes and fair treatment by inclusion or a lack of inclusion in one's moral community. Albert Schweitzer included all living creatures in his moral community, and some Buddhists include all of nature. Most of us define a more limited moral community. Individuals and groups who are outside the boundary in which considerations of fairness apply may be treated in ways that would be considered immoral if people within the boundary were so treated. Consider the situation in Bosnia. Prior to the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Serbs, Muslims, and Croats in Bosnia were more or less part of one moral community and treated one another with some degree of civility. After the start of civil strife, initiated by power-hungry political leaders, vilification of other ethnic groups became a political tool, and it led to excluding others from one's moral community. As a consequence, the various ethnic groups committed the most barbaric atrocities against one another. The same thing happened with the Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda and Burundi. At various periods in history and in different societies, groups and individuals have been treated inhumanly by other humans, slaves by their masters, natives by colonialists, blacks by whites, Jews by Nazis, and so on. Moral exclusion is perhaps the most dangerous form of oppression. It has led to genocide against the Jews and Gypsies by the Nazis, the Turkish genocide of the Armenian, the auto-genocide by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the mass killings of the political opposition by the Argentinian generals, to widespread terrorism against civilians by various terrorist groups, to the enslavement of many Africans, to mention only a few examples of the consequences of moral exclusion. The lesser forms of moral exclusion, marginalization, occur also against whole categories of people: women, the physically impaired, the elderly, and their many societies where barriers prevent them from full participation in the political, economic, and social